name's Mike, and welcome to my first ASMR video. I've been blessed with quite the social media following over the past, 3 or so years, to levels that, frankly, I never thought possible. And so many people, I should say, have told me that my voice and cadence has been soothing, and they could listen to me as they fall asleep. And I never really knew what that meant until I started listening to people on YouTube doing ASMR. And then I understood. I understood exactly what they meant. So I figured starting this channel might be a good way for me to give back to those people who supported me, however big or small. By Dr. Naomi Kraft. This is a book I was gifted, I don't know how many years ago. But because it has all of these medical breakthroughs and things that, you and I probably take for granted, I thought it might be fun to read through them. And, of course, being a physician, interjecting my own little ideas and commentary. So I'm going to start with the one that is closest to my heart. This one is from 1922, and as a type 1 diabetic, I could not possibly be here without insulin. During digestion, the body normally changes sugars and other nutrients into a form of sugar called glucose. The blood carries glucose to cells in the body, and insulin helps change it into energy for the cells to use. We rely, for survival, on this ability to change food into energy. Now, that's partially true. Insulin actually helps the glucose get from outside of the cell inside the cell. There are other ways to get glucose from outside to inside the cell where it's used, but insulin certainly is the big one. And Dr. Kraft is right. Without insulin, we die. Type 1 diabetics cannot digest sugar due to a lack of insulin, which is normally produced in the pancreas. As a result, the blood sugar level is high, and people with this condition feel tired and thirsty and lose weight and pass large quantities of sugary urine. Kinda gross, but definitely true. Diabetes is rapidly fatal unless treated with insulin. Although German researchers had already discovered back in 1889 that the pancreas contained something that stopped diabetes from developing, attempts to isolate this substance and use it for treatment were unsuccessful. It was only made possible 30 years later when John McLeod, the professor of physiology in Toronto, gave Frederick Banting, a surgeon at that hospital, and the medical student called Charles Best, the run of his laboratory, while he went fishing in Scotland for the summer. Working with dogs in the laboratory, the men incorporated the work of a biochemist called James Bertram Cullop, who began refining a pure extract of the pancreas containing the anti-diabetic agent, later known as insulin. Leonard Thompson, a 14-year-old diabetic, was the first human to receive the pure extract. Thompson had been diabetic for 3 years, and at the time, he was near death, weighing just 65 pounds. 3 years is a long time to survive as a type 1 diabetic without insulin. The early ways of treating this disease were massive calorie restriction. But I'll tell you, 500 calories a day, not much of a life, if you ask me. After receiving Cullop's extract, Thompson's symptoms began to disappear, and his blood sugar returned to normal. The results were unequivocal. This extract of pancreas had a significant anti-diabetic effect on humans. The new extract was called insulin, and began to be produced in industrial quantities by Eli Lilly in Indianapolis. In recognition of their achievement, the 1923 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine was awarded to Banting and McLeod, who shared the money with Best and Cullop. You know, I'm recording this in 2020. That was less than 100 years ago. My grandfather, who I spoke to 3 days ago, was born in 1925, 3 years after insulin became a thing. People understood it, knew what it was, knew how it worked. And to think that if I was born in, well, I won't give away my age, but to think if I was born 100 years before I was, I wouldn't be here today to make this video. I wouldn't be here to talk to you. I wouldn't be here at all. You know, it's wild to think about all the people who've come before you and who have made all of these wild advancements that frankly we take for granted. You know, I've been on insulin my entire life. Well, since I was 6. Most of the life that I remember anyway. And without these guys, less than 100 years ago, I wouldn't be here. And it's really cool to think about what could have happened. And it's even cooler to think about what's going to happen over the course of the next 100 years. You know, diabetes, if managed properly, is just, you know, it's a bad disease, but if you do well with it, you'll do well. It's difficult, there's a learning curve, but without insulin, there would be tens of millions of people around the world who would just be dead today. I wouldn't have a chance. You know, my parents wouldn't have a son. My wife would have a different husband. But, you know, you get it. So, I'm very thankful for these guys. I'll read you another one. Something else I'd used. Kid. They're not called glasses. When they were invented in Italy in the late 1200s, they were called spectacles. Allegedly. Although there were no spectacles in ancient times, there were certainly many people with poor vision Cicero, the Roman philosopher and orator, wrote to his friend Titus Atticus, one of Rome's great writers and statesmen, saying that his slaves had to read to him because he could no longer read to himself now that he was old. Allegedly, there was an alternative, even in ancient Roman times. The philosopher and dramatist Seneca claims to have read. The theoretical principles behind corrective lenses were already in place, as we have evidence that the Greek astronomer Ptolemy had described the basic laws of diffraction in roughly 140 AD. However, it wasn't until the 17th century that these laws were formalized and developed further by Willibrord Snellius. I apologize if I butchered that name. A Dutch astronomer and mathematician. Reading stones, often made from quartz, became popular in the 8th century. First in Spain, and then traveling to the rest of Europe by the 11th century. These stones relied on a similar principle of Seneca's bowl of water. A reading stone was simply a hemisphere of glass placed on top of the words to magnify the letters. I feel like these are common in ancient movies. They must have done their homework. At the time, the only people capable of making transparent glass were the glass blowers of Venice. So it's likely that the first spectacles were developed in Italy. One of the earliest inventors was probably a Dominican monk, Alessandro de Spina, from Florence, around 1284, but there is no definite evidence for this. I hope it's true. My grandmother's from Florence. That'd be pretty cool. The first mention of actual glasses is found in a 1289 manuscript, when a member of the Florentine Popozzo family wrote in a manuscript entitled Tratte de Conute de Famille di Popozza. I am so debilitated by age that without the glasses known as spectacles, I would no longer be able to read or write. These have recently been invented for the benefit of poor old people whose sight has become weak. The first designs didn't have sides and had to be held onto the nose. This part blows my mind. Poorer people had theirs mounted in leather, wood, horn, bone, or even light steel, while upper class had gold or silver frames. I feel like in today's hipster generation, bone glasses could make a comeback. Maybe not. For centuries, nobody found a good way to hold spectacles in place. Spanish spectacle makers tied silk ribbons onto the frames, which could be looped over the ears, and the Chinese added little weights to the end of the ribbons. Could you imagine holding your glasses up by ribbons and a weight behind your ear? Seems wild, but gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. The things we take for granted. It was only in 1730 that an English instrument maker, Edward Scarlett, designed spectacles with rigid side arms. that story is crazy. I think that's so cool. You know, in ancient Greece, you got these guys with, no eyesight. Some of these, ancient philosophers and scholars, they lived to be super old. 80s, 90s. For 2,000 years ago, that's insane. And they would get so old, they would go blind because of old age. Not because they just couldn't see as kids, like so many of us now. They went blind because they got old, and they got tired of reading. And I can only imagine them looking through these giant bowls of glass filled with water to read some simple letter, like, "Hi, how you doing?" And maybe that was it. All these great thinkers had to put their thoughts down on paper. And if they couldn't see what they were writing, they couldn't write. But then you get the big glass of water. And then you get these guys from Venice who blow glass, and these big, giant domes of glass that you put on the table and you read through. Kind of like the glass in that little triangular thing on a Ouija board. Somebody will know what I mean. And then you get these things that you've got to hold on your nose like this, right? And then these guys from Spain decide to put silk around them. And then the Chinese decide to put little weights there. Like you got to balance it on your forehead, sort of. On the bridge of your nose, and you have to lean forward so the weights don't fall back and pull the glasses into your skull. And then, millennia later, after the concept was taken down and understood, glasses, as we know them today, are invented. And you gotta think so many people, both young and old, have benefited from those centuries of innovation and practice and trial and error, that you reflect on it and you see how awesome it is that we just walk around and see people with glasses on and you don't think twice. But there was a time when maybe our parents couldn't read a dinner menu, or when somebody couldn't see the blackboard. And instead of getting a terrific education, they would be cast aside. And you've got to wonder how much greatness of humanity has come from something as simple as glasses. Still wild. Alright, those are the stories I'm going to read to you tonight. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm tired.